Welcome to the last of our lectures in the lecture series that the Center for New Art, the undergraduate and graduate art department at William Patterson University have hosted. We're really lucky today to have Juana Valdes. Many of you have already been at other lectures. We have no other lectures to announce. This is the last one. Come next year. So I want to introduce Juana. Juana completed her MFA in Fine Arts from the School of Visual Arts in 1993 and her BFA in Sculpture at Parsons School of Design in 1991. She was born in Cabanas, Pinar del Rio, Cuba, and came to the United States in 1971. Juana currently teaches as an assistant professor of printmaking at Florida Atlantic University in the Visual Arts and Art History Department. She is an accomplished artist. Come on, go sideways. Okay, that's not going to happen, I guess. She's an accomplished artist. Her works were in a series of recent exhibitions: Treasure Island at the Lower East Side Print Shop, Remnants, What Remains at the Thomas Hunter Project Space, and at the Museum of Contemporary Art, North Miami, Third Space, Inverting the Impossible, which is accompanied by a publication. Past exhibitions include a solo show at SENSEI Gallery 2013 and at the Untitled Art Fair in Miami Beach. Hudson River Museum Art in General, El Museo del Barrio, White Box Gallery, Bronx River Arts, PS1 Contemporary Art Center, Paul Sharp Contemporary Art, Diaspora Vibe Cultural Arts Incubator, and No Raham Gallery are a selection of the spaces that have shown her work. Valdes is participating in a range of residencies, most currently at the European Keramic Work Center in the Netherlands and the Jamaica Center for the Arts and Learning, the Atlantic Center of the Arts, the Artist Residency at the Center for Book Arts, and the Lower East Side Print Shop. And now she's a resident here at William Patterson University in our micro-residency program. So without further ado, I introduce Juana Valdes.
Okay, so for everybody that made it, thank you so much for coming. It's always good to be loved, even if it's in small amounts. But thank you for taking the time to be here, and hopefully this will be worth your while. So normally I start right off the bat talking about myself, but I had a lunch conversation that made me reconsider that. And so what I decided to do, because I think this is really about you, what you're looking at is a project that I did with my students, and it's going to help you to understand how I work and the diversity of my work. So this took place in 2011 at a space which is called Legal Art in Miami, that now is called Cannonball. It's a nonprofit space. It's been funded by the Warhol Foundation. And we were invited by a curator to do a project. I was invited by a curator to do a project that was somewhat fluxus in nature. And so I decided to work with my students. So I'm there. We're a combination of BA, BFA, and MFA students. We went to the site. We printed in the studios first. Then we went to the site. We installed directly on the site. We set up a makeshift printing station on site. And we went about installing this sort of series of prints based on the concept of the collective directly onto the site and the space. And so here we are working day and night for like 3 days until we finally finish putting the whole site together and install the piece, which is, as it is done as a collective, so it's no one individual artist's work. Is what we do as a group. We collectively made the images, recycle screens, and then sort of worked about generating whatever you see finally on the wall. I like, and I have done several projects with my students, whether something like this or we have traveled abroad as a collective and done exhibitions internationally. But this ability to go from a medium that is normally seen as a 2D to a 3 space installation is something that is very typical of the kind of work that I do. So I'm always sort of extrapolating from 2 media to a larger. So this is really sometimes where I like to start my presentation, because I think everybody is impacted by something early on in their life that shapes and defines the perspective on life. And for me, what defined my perspective for art was this project that I worked on the surrounded island with Crystal in Miami in 1982. So I must have been almost about the same age, 20, 21 at that time. Crystal came to Miami. He, at that time, is not the Crystal that we know. He had a sort of beginning, budding career. He's done a couple of projects. And he set about doing this project where he actually surrounded the islands that surround Biscayne Bay in this particular fabric. And it took almost like a mini nation of people who actually volunteered for over 2 weeks, going from land to water to land again. Moving and cleaning. We got to the island, we cleaned all the debris, all the pollution. Then we went and we rolled out this material, transferred it by sea. The architects came and surveyed the land and surveyed the installation system to install the fabric. And then we, all the participants, went back out and installed the fabric onto the land. And it sort of had made me understand that art can be anything, you know, but it has to have a meaning and it has to have a purpose, you know. And it doesn't necessarily just has to fit within the confine of a gallery space or a museum. So one of the other things that's really significant about who I am is the fact that I was born in Cuba and my family came to the United States when I was very young. So this issue of migration is something that has been consistent in my work. You're looking at an image which is a cyanotype on fabric. And it's one of the themes that I go back and revisit in my works in a series of different types of mediums. What you're looking at are boats. They're made from a novel. The novel is called Cecilia Valdes. It's a bit of a pun since my last name is also Valdes, but it's one of the quintessential sort of novel that's written about Cuba in the sort of like the 19th century, and it's really talking about the sort of miscegenation that is taking place in the country, because at that time they had stopped importing slaves, so the only way you could generate slave was through birth. So if you had a plantation and you had slaves and you slept with a woman, her child became your property also as well. And so I took this novel and I was in Havana, and a friend of mine was curating a series of interventions on the street, and he asked me to participate. And so I bought the novel there, and I took the pages of the novel and set in the area which is called El Malecón, which is actually the frontier or the border of Cuba, because after that it's only the ocean. And I ripped out the pages of the book, and I made them into small little boats. And I gather them, and then I would take them and try to throw them off the Malecón into the ocean, and sort of kind of shepherd them onto the sea to see if they would, if they could make it. And it was a sort of very futile attempt at escape, because of course the paper dissolved and it fell and it sank into the water. What you're looking at in the background is a white little boat. That boat makes a route across the Malecón and back and prevents anybody from leaving the island on a continuous basis. And the Malecón is the fortress that you see at the back, which is so typical of most colonial cities, and especially in the island. It's what is used to protect the city. And so there are actually still cannons there and all that kind of stuff. And that's partially also why I used that area. And so this project was really an intervention. And one of the main reasons why I used the book, it's the idea of literature always being used as a means of escape. So about later, I think that was in 2000. In 2002, I got the opportunity to go to Holland for the first time to the European Keramic Work Center. And the Dutch, which is a group of people who also have a very strong relationship to water, because the Netherlands is more water than land, actually. And they also have a very strong history of trade as well. I was introduced to working with ceramic for the first time. And you're looking at one of the first projects that I made there, which is a series of cast porcelain boats. And so when I first did the project in Cuba, it didn't make sense for me to do the same, just keep repeating that project outside of Cuba. I really needed to find a material that was significant enough for me to really recreate that work. And the Dutch history of trade, porcelain as being one of the first fine material that gets exported from Asia to Europe, seemed like the right synchronicity for me to make this project. And it really begins also, especially the porcelain boats, as for me, as a way of remembering my childhood in Cuba. And one of the few toys that we have were these boats that we used to make to play with, because we really didn't have any toys. So another aspect of my work is the body, you know. And this is probably one of my earliest works, which is a dress. It's all beaded with fish hooks and lead, and in the inside there's an audio and a light. And the audio sort of talks about the intricacy of developing a relationship, not just with another person, but also a relationship of you being sort of in or outside of the island, which is something that most Cubans have to struggle with and deal with, whether you're on the island or if you're off the island, and what does it mean, and do you go back or not. So it also defines and markates the work. And this is actually an exhibition, I think it was in 2006 or 2007, that I was able to do at the Paul Sharp Gallery, which sort of brings all of these works together. So when I graduated and I finished my master's, I think the way that I can define my thesis was that I actually was a printmaker that dealt with print as an installation medium, and so that it went directly onto the walls. It didn't remain in the confine of paper. And what you're looking at is a series of screen print images directly on the wall. One of the first artists that does this is Warhol, actually. He used to do that. And the images that you're looking at are images that have been recycled from 18th century prints that were done of the Orient. And if you look at all the women, they kind of look really exotic and very beautiful, and they're sort of naked. But if you get close, I don't know if I have a close image, if you look at their faces, all their faces are very European. And so it's the idea of this sort of exotic nudity and consumption of the female body. What was really interesting, when I started to do this project, I had to decide what I would do with the walls, and I went to the Home Depot, and I went looking for paint, and what I realized is that all the different colors of skin tones, if they were very light, they had like really sweet names like Jewel and Angel Peas and Heavenly this, and as the colors got darker, then they became like Enchilada and Café Noir and Devil's Food, and the darker the color, the more mysterious and exotic it became and dangerous. And it made me aware of something that I continue to sort of question in my work, is how through consumerism and mass-produced object, one's own ideology is being manipulated, you know? And you are being, without even you being aware, there are particular stereotypes or ideology that comes through the consumption of mass media, where if you, no matter how aware or unaware you are, is there and is somehow affecting you. And here I go, to being a traditional printmaker. So this is a series of, and actually these were the last thing that I did, the installation, and the installation comes with a video of myself taking a shower where I take a soap and I cover my body in soap and then allow the water to sort of cleanse me and clean me, at the same time revealing my body, and the ritual perpetuates itself throughout the installation. And so you're looking at the same images, which I sort of isolated from this mass sort of collage, montage that they have done as a shower curtains. And you see them as shower curtains and tablecloths and all of that, and done a series of 5 prints in which each image is generated through 3 colors, never using white or black, which is normally what you use to reproduce images in most common media. So this project that you see here is at, I had the residency at Jamaica Arts Center, in Jamaica, Queens, New York, not the island. And so in that part, I combined the piece that you see in the back. It's a large sail that is made of small handkerchiefs, white men's handkerchief, which is combined to a process which is done in Japanese paper backing. And so the images are silk screened onto the fabric. The text is coming out of Joseph Conrad's The Heart of Darkness. And the sail, which at one time meant modernity and exploration, and allow for Europe to sort of almost conquer the world and expand, now is this relationship of how something that could be very new and very modern can easily become obsolete. you know. And also at the same time, how exploration and exploitation sort of almost go hand in hand in a way. This is part of another piece of the installation. And the images actually come from the story The Nun, which is a British, actually no, it's a Belgium story about a nun who right before World War II goes to the Congo and is doing missionary work. And I was at home, you know, one day watching this, and sort of like the person, if you see on the corner, the nun is played by Audrey Hepburn. And, you know, I couldn't help it how, like, the images of Africa in over 50 years had not changed, you know, and I couldn't understand why was that. So I went out and to find it through literature for you to better understand what is happening in the images behind you. You can actually, if you look at the book, the books actually begin to explain and define and codify the imagery that you're seeing, and why is it that it's in so many ways, it still remains the same when you look at Africa. And so on either side, you're getting relics of the culture as it moves across the Atlantic and sort of becomes part of this diasporic, you know, nation that we actually exists right now. This is images again, pieces from the exhibition. And this is actually the original piece is made as a pair of sandals made out of wax, and this is a digital print generated from the exhibit. So to put it all within context, I was very lucky as a young, sort of mature artist, you know, like yourself at this time, to have come to New York in the early 90s, you know, and to be right in the heart of it as the art world was defining itself and really cementing itself as the contemporary art world that we know today. And I had the opportunity to see a lot of these artists making their first work, from the minimalist on, making this kind of works and exhibiting. So you're looking at the work of Lorna Simpson, and she is actually also half Cuban. And these is a series, she started out as a photographer, but what you're looking at are a series of prints that she did as lithograph on felt. You know, and Lorna also deals a lot with women's sexuality and issues of race and gender and class. This is another one of her images. I think I brought Thelma, and I think this other artist, if you don't know him, you should. I think is a really significant artist to know as well. His name is Felix Gonzalez Torres. He's actually also Cuban as well. And Felix actually is a conceptual artist, gay, died of AIDS already, but really sort of made an incredible impact in the art world. And what you're looking is an entitled Placebo that actually references the work of Ronnie Horn, who actually took gold, a leaf gold, and generated this sheet of paper, almost made out of leaf gold, and sort of placed it in a museum. And sort of in this way, he's referencing her work, but this is actually made out of candy. And most time people are able to pick up the candy and take it away. So one day I was walking down the Bowery, which at the time wasn't so pretty, as you can see. And I saw this image, and I was really sort of compelled by the image. And I thought, oh my God, Macy's did a great ad. This is an incredible ad, right? I was like so moved, so touched by it. And then later on that year, I walked into the MoMA, and I see the same image on a wall in the MoMA, and realized it's Felix Gonzalez Torres. And he's actually the bed where him and his lover slept, right, with the it happened. It's a memory of the intimacy of the moment of two people share together. And he did a lot of these works that were a little bit kind of sad, but very compelling and very touching right before he passed away. And you can see, and I brought this other piece because in a way you can see where some references can be seen. This was done also at the European Keramic Center. And again, like this Porcelain Boats is made out of porcelain, but I remember as one of the other things I remember as a child in Cuba was having this small little pillow that I would take with me everywhere that I would go, you know. And it was provided an incredible amount of comfort and safety. And it was one of the few things, like when we left Cuba, we were like 4 kids, and my mom left with 1 suitcase. So we weren't allowed to even take photographs of yourself, of your family. So there were no memento, nothing at all to tie you back to the memory. And I often go on residencies, and so the images that you're looking at this work, it's actually, were done in Ryn, Poland. It's a small little town, 18 miles from the Russian border, about really close to where Hitler had the eagle's nest. And actually the image that you see at the bottom that has all the rocks and kind of sort of protruding is one of the bunkers, is a swimming pool bunker. Actually, for the whole compound, they had all the bunkers. What they did was they blew them up, and so you have all this concrete jetting out inside of this wood, in the middle of this wood forest, you know, right near the railroad tracks, and nature is sort of reclaiming it. And so I love these structures that I found in the museum in the local town, and sort of brought them back, and was asked to do this installation, this project in the Bronx, and I sort of recreated their installation and brought back the images of the residency and combined them together. You know, after September 11th, I think there was an exodus that took place in New York, and at this time I was doing my residency at Smack Mellon, and I spent that year documenting bed sheets that were thrown on the streets on the way to the studio and back to the studio. I think it was a period in time where people became aware the fact that if there is a major catastrophe, the Manhattan is almost impossible to evacuate. Anybody that stays on the island in an unconscious way knows that if really something serious was to take place, there's no way that everybody on the island can evacuate. You know, on September 11th, people spent the day walking off the island. And I remember looking at the Brooklyn Bridge, and this was happening on 57th Street, and you couldn't see the ground. All you saw was people's head as they walked across the bridge, you know. And I don't know if it was due to that, or maybe it was just a general moment in time, but it was a shift. It was another rupture in terms of my connection to a lot of friends, in which many of them moved out of the city. And it also reminded me, and also of the economical change that's taking place in New York City, and I think it's all happening all over the world in a way. When I moved to Manhattan in the late sort of early 90s, people threw away futons. I don't know if you guys don't even know what a futon is. Futons are like cotton sewn together. They're very cheap, you know, and so they're like, I used to look at them, and to me I would make fantasies about bad relationships and people's clothes that would be thrown. So it'd be the futon and their clothes and their makeup or their shoes or their records. And you kind of knew there was a relationship that went sour, you know. But people didn't care about them. You just sort of discarded them because they were not expensive, you know. But a mattress is a really expensive. It's a sign of maturity for most people, because it's probably one of the first objects that they will buy that has significant value. And so it's pricey. So people don't discard them as often as you think that they do. So you're looking at an installation of what those images look like, and I made them in like disposable Kodak. It was a disposable Kodak at the time. I had a disposable camera. We were still using film, believe it or not, at that time. I know, right? Can you imagine film? Does anybody know what film is? Has anybody ever touched film? And so this is an image of this piece and another work that I'll show you a close-up of, which I think sort of have a nice relationship and they talk to one another. Is for an exhibition in New Brunswick at Rutgers University. It was called Planet of the Slums. And so one of the ongoing little projects that I have is like, I'm actually traveling, when I'm traveling through the city, I collect signs that have been thrown away, you know, by people who are homeless. And so the mattress, in a way, talks about this. And I think also if you look at any significant report that is ever done in terms of any kind of major impact that takes place, women and children are the first to feel it. You know, they're the first to be impacted either by war, famine, you know, any major disaster, the first that sort of come out and end up on the street and in need. But I think all of this work talks to this economical shift that is taking place in the culture. So the title of this piece is really significant. It's called Found Object, circa 2009. So it really is referencing the sort of economical collapse of the market, you know, and how it was really felt, which was through the displacement of people losing their homes. And I actually went to the MoMA and looked at contemporary modernist frames. And sort of, and that's what I do. So I collect this sort of modernist frame and then think about which one to use depending on the sign, and really referencing in a way the sort of Duchampian idea of the found object. And so this is, now we're almost at the end, we're in 2012, and I had the opportunity to go again to the Netherlands. And this time I questioned why the material, why I love porcelain so much. And they also said, you know, the best porcelain to work with is bone china. And I was like, really? Well, I got to work with that. So you're looking at a series of what looks like sort of rags, but they're actually made out of bone china. And when I was there, I developed recipes that gave me different skin tones. So I did a project where you go from really light skin tones to really dark skin tones. And you're using a rag which is the same size as what most domestic workers use to clean rooms in hotels and public services as you're working. And sort of also kind of referencing, you know, this idea of drapery, so typical of Renaissance painting as well. And you can see the details of it. At the same time, they go from feeling like really like thin fabric to feeling like hide and skin to like almost discarded tissue. This is was another of the projects that I did, and this again is white and black bone china. And the beginning of my using sort of laser cutter, so the text is generated through laser stencils, which I actually pour, then I get the letters and combine it into a series of casting that we do in plaster. And so both of these images are sort of kind of combined together. And sort of, I was really interested in generating an image that could talk about, in a way, the crisis that we're undergoing in America right now of race, in a way that it wasn't figurative and narrative. And so you have this shape that is undefinable, almost uncontrollable, you know. And it's really, which is part of the discourse, I think, that one defines the other, one controls and shapes the other. And so I was interested in doing this in a very abstract way, and then slowly moving it in a way that you could finally get to the sort of more conceptual, theoretical discussion of the text, you know. I think it's easy to read something. I think when we have to sort of feel something, it becomes a little bit more personal. And I'm actually playing with the word black, and I remove letters, and it becomes something else. It becomes lack, it becomes crack, you know. It goes on, and it comes out of something that is undefinable to something that becomes definable. This is another series this is part of the work that I did when I was there. Actually, the final piece on the end is screen printed directly on clay and then fired, which is part of the work that I'm going to hopefully be developing here and taking back into paper as well. I left this for all those typographers out there. It's the letter I, actually, and it's cast in porcelain. Also, this is bone china as well. This is a series of aquatint, and the work that I'm actually will be developing here at the University of Williams-Patterson, which is the image of Obama. And I'm developing this hopefully as a 3D model that is going to generate a full standing sculpture. These are a series of aquatint, and I sort of went back and scanned the internet for images of Obama during his last two campaigns and put them together and combine him, sort of started to combine them and put them together. And as I started to do this research, I realized that Obama never makes a fist, you know. So the project that I'm going to carry on here is to generate an image of a mama making a symbolic Black Power movement, hand up in the air and fist, and hopefully to begin to continue the conversation, which is not to continue, but to actually generate more conversation in terms of what's taking place right now in the country as a whole. And this is actually the other body of work that's way more extensive, but I've been collecting for the last year and a half porcelain objects. And it actually traces the movement of porcelain and the design aesthetics from Asia. And it goes back, the Dutch created VAC, which is the East Indian Company, in the 17th century. It's almost like 16th century, ending of the 16th century. And that company is the beginning of our understanding of what a corporation is, actually. And they dealt and were solely able to deal with porcelain china coming from Japan for almost a whole century. Not a century, but half a century almost. They controlled all trade that was taking place. And so they create this market, and the idea of exporting resources from one country, developing it as a commodity, and then sort of reselling it onto to the world, which is pretty much the model that we have here today still. So all of these objects are stuff that I've been collecting and sort of generating this sort of conversation and documenting as a series of photographs as well. So the final work will be photographs, you know. They come back together to sort of talk about this you know, relationship of design, craft, and fine art, and how it intermingles. And this is a series of the photographs. And this is actually, I think, my last image, which is I love this because it's where I really am, which I'm really interested in this intersection between art and culture. And what you're looking at are three bowls. The very first rim is British, it's bone china. The second one is Japanese, and the last one that fills the inside of the circle is actually also Japanese, but it has a lot of sort of Korean influence. And so I'm really interested in how the combination of these all objects put together generate this other complete new thing that exists that combines all these cultures together. And I want to thank you all for coming. It's been really wonderful. And I hope you enjoyed it.
A couple of different things. Yeah, that'd be nice. So that's a physical object where you've got the actual three bowls or three, you know, ceramic pieces, right?
Yes.
And so, you know, it's kind of also a fabulous image too. And you seem to play so fluidly between image and object and whatever. Is that something you do? Would you cross over into image with that piece, or?
It is. It's meant to exist as a photograph.
Oh, sorry, I missed that. Sorry.
Yeah. So I mean,
Sorry.
Experience that in 3 dimensions at all.
you don't, because well, you do, but you can't. It's writing here, you know. It's in there. It doesn't. Well, no. I'm sort of like, I can't help it to have grown up in New York in the 90s. The aesthetics under I think I'm being recorded. Yeah, the aesthetics that I go under is so sophisticated, you know. It's Vito, it's Soloid, it's Irwin. It's like, you know, it's overwhelming, and there's this fluidity, which I think comes out of my own generation, and you can see it, you know, in other artists, where the idea of just painting, of just sculpture, of just video, I mean, now it's very normal, but when we were coming of age, it wasn't so normal, you know. But I think it's what defines my generation, is this ability to actually have this fluidity, to be able to generate cultural image. And a lot of my group of artists that I know, we actually use this term of culture producers, not just as a visual artist, because I think what we're doing is generating additional imagery that goes into culture, that actually alters in some way, you know, reflect the culture back to itself, you know.
Also the idea that you're going to force is maybe not quite the right word.
Generate.
But I'm talking about the Obama image now.
Yeah, that's
that
what
he's
I
gonna
mean,
do the
generate. I'm
fist.
going to generate.
Yeah, you're going to generate. How do you think that Obama would feel about
You're
that?
going to close his hand.
I'm going to generate it.
Fist in his life before. It's not like he's lived his life without making a fist. So she's just finding something we haven't seen.
Thank you.
No, but I'm kind of interested from his point of view. How would he feel? What do you suppose his response would be? I mean, he's obviously been very careful.
I'm going to let him answer that, no.
Oh, I'm not going to answer. I was going to. So,
He's obviously been very careful about never
Well, he did
being
once,
seen in
and he made it
public.
to the New Yorker.
No, but wait, that was
there's a
an
long
illustration
That
that
was an
somebody.
illustration.
Certainly isn't the only
No,
person
no.
who's made calculated hand gesture children.
Oh, the Clinton.
No, they all do. They all have their own
Yeah.
things, you know.
and actually, the Clinton gesture goes back to John F. Kennedy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if I can I get in here?
Yeah.
Well, question, and I really enjoyed your presentation. Really enjoyed the presentation. So, your work is, and I mean this is a compliment. Honestly, it's all over the place for me.
Okay.
You talked about artists as cultural creators
Producers.
or producers. Maybe artists as cultural agents of change, perhaps as well. I wanted to ask you what you thought. What do you think? Now that relations. This goes back to your original home, Cuba. How do you think that will affect the artists who remain there?
In Cuba?
Yeah. What do you think this whole?
Well, it's really interesting because people don't understand that Cuban art, right now, Cuban artists living within Cuba sell more art than any Cuban artist living outside of Cuba. Like there are all this group of artists who make an incredible amount of money who still reside in Cuba, like Los Carpinteros. They are represented by Sean Kelly. They make art all over the world, but their studio is based in Cuba. And so it reminds me a little bit of actually when the Berlin Wall fell, I think when the wall collapsed, that there's an interest and a desire to go there and to see the art and to collect the art, even if people have already started to do that. And I think it's going to change the dynamic, For me as a Cuban person, it's really hard to separate the part of who I am from the art itself. And so for me, I'm experiencing a country that is in really in a severe state of poverty and disenfranchisement, I can say right now. And so this opening up, it's going to allow for people who don't have accessibility to the outside to have a better life, What will it do to art? Of course, it's going to shift the dynamics of that, Will it be significant? That's really kind of hard to know, It's going to open it up when everybody can go there. Will people still be as interested? It's all of that is kind of up and in the air right now. I don't think anybody knows exactly what's going to happen. But I don't think artists within Cuba or outside of Cuba are going to stop making art. They have a really strong culture for art making, as for music and as for everything else. So I don't think that this is going to impact them as much as it is going to impact the average everyday person.
Hi. Oh, sorry, Brian. Okay. Thank you very much for your talk. I really enjoyed learning more about your work. I really liked how you included images of other artists' work, your peers, to really see the other threads and how that weave that together. The last images you showed of those objects on the shelf really made me think of Liliana Porter's work.
Of course, yes.
And that's really nice, wonderful connection too, to think about how she uses objects and the connections between those objects.
And she photographs them also.
And she
as well.
photographs them also. So it's really nice to, because then I see your work, I think about your ideas and this other context too. I'm really excited about your project here, and I'm curious about the visual form. Like for me, because I'm still so new to the whole 3D printing and stuff, like I understand it and the idea, but how it's actualized for me is interesting, like the actual shape that it takes. So do you have any thoughts? Like, is it going to be made in styrofoam and then epoxied, or I don't know, like I'm curious if you've had any
we
thoughts
have. We've been.
about
I mean,
that.
this is what I've been here and working with the students here, and developing and sort of sorting out the strategic design of the actual sculpture. And so they're helping me also sort out all those questions that we have, and we've been doing it. And so the piece, we're actually going to have a figure we're going to generate from a combination of scanning and visual images. A small model of Obama actually standing and sustaining that pose, which we have decided he's going to stand on top of the White House, and that White House is going to be sustained by a rock formation, which is really interesting. I taught at Bard College for 4 years, so I would travel up there. I would pass all these the Palisades and all these rocks and the river and West Point and all this different stuff. And so the idea of this sort of fortress, kind of almost isolation, but not. It's all sort of. I mean, I don't have a clear statement of yet of how it all unites, but I do have the image. Like the image solidified itself in my head, and I know that that's the structure that it's going to take. So I think we're going to generate the bottom from styrofoam, and then we're going to 3D print the White House and the Obama figure, probably in different sections, and then glue it all together and see how it comes. Yeah, hopefully.
I have 2 questions. The first one's more on the spot-ish. Congratulations on this residency, and you were talking about combining it with the residency that you're doing over in Gutenberg. And to bring it back around to Cuba again, you're making these depictions of Obama, but you're also presenting it in an area of New Jersey that has more Cubans per square mile than Havana. So it's.
I wouldn't say that, but,
Yeah, well,
but
it's-
I understand what you mean.
It's West New York and New Jersey has more Cubans per square mile.
But then any other city in the United States.
Oh, okay. But that was a fact I read. But yeah, you definitely don't have to bring any Cuban dialogue into it, but there is an audience there. And is there any considerations you might take to make any Cuban dialogue inserted into that show?
Well, I think you have to understand, that the dialogue is already there, and it's so. First of all, I am Cuban. Second of all, I am black, So Cubans don't separate that as much, It's a weird thing. You're Cuban, and then you're everything else. So the fact that I'm doing this work is also speaking to that aspect, Like I questioned myself before I started this work, before Obama even announced that he was going to start relationship with Cuba, And I really questioned whether I should do this work or not, because I was questioning whether if it was still valid, This work begins before Trayvon Martin, okay? That's how long ago the idea of this work started, and it started as drawings on paper with ink and wash. So you're seeing the evolution of an idea that had started since before, I think, 2012, And so the fact that Obama is now the one who's creating this dialogue with Cuba and changing the dynamics that is taking place in Cuba, I think it's just going to add to the discourse that I want to have, because in Cuba as well, there is a discourse of race as well. It doesn't separate. It's happening there in terms of who has accessibility and who doesn't have accessibility. I don't necessarily feel that I have to address it to the community here, because I also, live in Miami, so I also have my constituency there also as well. So for me, this separation doesn't really exist in terms of geography. I think it exists more in terms of like how you define yourself. And I was up at Oswego and I did another lecture in which I defined myself as a Cuban American. And the reason why I did that is because I think to negate any aspect of your experience, whether if it's race, okay, or even your nationality, anything that you negate, is you negating yourself as a whole. And so I can't say that I'm just Cuban, because I have this other experience that I don't want to negate, that I want to also embrace, because it allows me to sit here with you and have this conversation.
Last question. I thought it was awesome how you ended on like that image and the way you described it and everything, and it gets me thinking. just looking at it, the way that the top plate was this, but the second plate was Japanese, and the other one was Japanese with inflections of Korean. And it was interesting how it seemed like the bottom two were one plate, and how they were seamless. And it gets me thinking that what if there was views of the bottoms of the plate, and it's this culture, but it's made in China or India.
That
And,
is there.
you
I mean,
know.
I know that you're
Yeah.
doing similar stuff.
Yeah, but then it could be like, you know, the like how we make as artists, we train and we make the grayscale, and you go from, you know, one continent to the other, and there's the seamless. And I was thinking about all these.
There is. Actually, there's a very, I mean, this is a really lengthy project. There's this one particular sculpture. It's not here, but all of the sculpture, actually, let me click on this one, have that. If you look at this one, let me see. Can we do that view? This particular here at the bottom one, let me see view. Let's see if we can.
Currently, on the slideshow tab, like you had it.
Okay. Wait. Do I go here or no?
Go to on the top. Go to slideshow,
Okay.
and then from current slide on the left.
Okay, thank you. So if you see here, I actually started to photograph each individual image from the bottom so you can actually see the mark. And it traces this idea of craft and design as well. So it goes, a lot of them shows when it's handmade. It will tell you where if it's done in England or in Japan, wherever, or China. Actually, I don't have a lot of stuff from China. Predominantly, it goes from Japan to Europe, you know, and then eventually to the United States, because here in New Jersey, the Lenox factory actually produced an incredible amount of China. And a lot of the people that worked in that China factory were Irish. And were coming from Ireland and from England. So you can sort of trace also the design and how it happens. But there is another part of the project that traces the mark of the individual project. And you go from like the actually handmade to stamp to actually silkscreen to paper, you know. And you can see the impact of mass production and how that is being changed. And what I love is that many of them, when they're handmade, they have written it's handmade. It really kind of gives it this other authenticity to it, you know, that makes it and adds value to it, as well as the objects that don't have any, you know, placement or in terms of geography. Okay, this is the last question.
Yeah, last question.
This is just getting going. No, you've been working hard.
Okay, go ahead, James.
All right. You obviously have, you know, you really pay attention to the significance of materials. And I was just wondering if you have any ideas about that for your current residency here, or how concerned you are with using like the styrofoam and the 3D printed plastic, or if you're kind of waiting for that idea to develop as you work with it.
You're right. I have to think about that. I like the idea of the 3D modeling as a way of generating that image, you know. I also thought that maybe once I have it, I might cast it in ceramic as well. I thought, you know, even discuss with Michael the possibility of that image as a marble sculpture. Yeah, in the future. Yeah, that could be ultimately, that becomes a monument, and what would that mean? It's like, I don't know. That would be like, we were French on.
Maybe the Warhol in Union Square took the pop off, right?
You have to sort of, like guerrilla drop it in Washington D.C. somewhere.
But you know, security breaches are possible,
I know.
right?
Thank you. That's why it sits on a fortress.
But it would just get taken down like the Snowden
Fly in with a
did.
helicopter.
Yeah.
It's marble, it'll be a little hard.
Like bright
Get rid
white.
of.
So what does it mean to, imagine, what would it be to make Obama in white marble, you know?
Yeah, that's
It's got all kinds
Well,
of
I think there was a
connotations.
lot of
Right?
discussion about this when they put the Martin Luther King monument up, you know. that-
Which was made in China.
Right,
Yeah.
made in China. There was a lot of discourse about, you know, where it was made and what it looked, you know, all of the materials, everything.
And white marble on top of the White House.
So, but right now we're going to work on the 3D because it's a new experience for me. One of the other things that I'm going to do also is we're going to carve the text on wood, and we're going to make prints in which the paper is going to shape into the words itself. so that it's going to almost emulate skin again, and skin start actually being shaped, you know, and being forced to transform in a way. So in that way, I'm already thinking about the materials, but I haven't yet arrived at the totality in terms of the sculpture. I don't know if I'll stay styrofoam. I might make it out of something else once I finish
You
it.
print little mini ones, and then you could leave them in places.
I
feel
thought
like you
about
could-
that.
Just so there was an art project where people were leaving like little mini sculptures all over the place. It'd be great to leave
It's
those
a-
all over
you-
Washington, D.C. little minis.
You can make a little one and have
Mini.
a spotlight and cast a shadow monument.
Yeah.
and I feel like the possibilities.
Just
of
selling the
placing them-
souvenirs. Like
I
all
mean,
the
they
souvenir
become like
shops over
souvenirs.
DC, they're endless. Like
Right.
you go to the
But they're not
the-
like this, right? Like I feel like you could.
I wonder if I could go on the streets of DC and sell it as a souvenir.
You could do it. What do they call it? Shop dropping?
Oh, yeah, you can shop that.
Shop drop it. You know, put it on a shelf with a fake sticker or something.
Yeah, and then take a photo of that.
Circulation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, possibility.
The possibilities are endless. That's why I'm here.
Love a little gorilla.
I
Well,
know.
I also love the fact that you're going to, you know, what the work that you do here is going to be exhibited with this Gutenberg.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys know, Gutenberg, well, I should say Guttenberg. 'cause that's the way
Guttenberg, yeah.
everybody in Guttenberg says it.
Yeah.
That there's a Guttenberg is near North Bergen, in between the Lincoln Tunnel.
Yeah.
In between the Lincoln Tunnel and the George Washington Bridge, if you didn't know. And there's a print center there called the Guttenberg Print Shop, right? Or-
Gutenberg Arts.
Arts, yeah. And I just found out about it, which is amazing. But the fact that we're doing a collaboration by somebody coming in, it's like the migratory, you know?
Yeah.
It's like fantastic that that's going to take place.
It's interesting because
And when will it open?
so in Gutenberg I will have an individual exhibition which is where I hope this work will be exhibited, and that's going to happen in the beginning of July.
So beginning of July.
July.
So
I'll have a
you'll send us
one-person show.
information, we'll pass it around, and
Yeah.
hopefully we all can, you know, visit that and be part of it. Yeah.
Because it will take me back into what is going to be a predominantly Cuban community.
Yeah.
So I will get firsthand back sort of experience of how they respond to the work. You know, so they will be the first one to be giving me back feedback. It'll be interesting to see what they say
Nice.
and how they
Very
experience
nice.
the work.
Yeah. Art is the future.
It's
It's also
future and the
interesting.
past.
If you make this in stone, you know, there's the white marble,
Yeah.
which as you saw sometimes it's more gray.
Mm.
But that facility also has access to black stone and red stone and green stone. You have the green going green, red politics.
Yeah.
You know, make them all in separate pieces.
I don't know. I'm thinking about the future. The future has endless possibilities. But I'm excited about this bizarre series of coincidences, and maybe it's not coincidence that all of these things have aligned themselves. I am actually also going to be a part of a two-person exhibition that will be also in the fall at Rutgers University that is actually dealing with the concept of the archipelago. And so they're bringing an artist that's sort of from the Pacific Rim and sort of the Caribbean, and that's going to be part of their, I think it's Institute of Cultural Studies, and it's going to really be talking about that aspect of migration, you know. So, and it's where I'm interested also for my work to exist, which is these places that sort of are hybrids of where culture is being sort of analyzed and investigated as well, and that it goes beyond the traditional gallery wall and museums.
Good. So thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.